Hi there. So in this webinar I'm going to talk about creating and grading quizzes. So I'm assuming that you know about creating and managing questions in the Moodle course question bank, and we're moving on now to harnessing those questions and using them inside in quizzes in a Moodle course. So we're at the second day of the series, and we're talking about assessment, and we're in the second session, grading and grading quizzes. Kind of an overview is to briefly review the types of quizzes that are available that you can set for your students, how to set up a quiz, and then configuring the details and selecting the questions, and then grading quizzes. How, after you've run the quiz, how do you grade them, or do you get Moodle to grade them, or do you have to grade them yourself? And finally, just briefly, just talk about the performance of questions on a quiz. So, very briefly, what are quizzes for? A number of different purposes that you might want different quizzes for. One is a kind of a formal assessment where the students are graded, and that grade counts towards their final module mark. And when you're doing formal assessment, you want the quizzes to be graded either manually or automatically, or a mixture of both perhaps. But they're important, so students need to pay attention to them. There are other types of quiz. You might have an informal assessment where you as a lecturer want to identify what do students know and what do they not know, what do you need to cover, what do you need to revise to make sure that they have a good overview of your particular module. And again, you can grade these automatically, or have Moodle grade them automatically, or manually yourself, or some kind of a mixture of both when you're grading. And the final type of quiz is more for the student than for the lecturer. It's for their own self-assessment, a kind of a gap analysis idea, where the student needs to know, maybe before exams, well, what are they strong on, what areas do they know enough about, and what areas are they weak on, what do they need to know more about, what do they need to study and focus on. So kind of self-assessment quizzes are a study aid for the students, and obviously these types of quiz have to be graded fully automatically in order to be useful. They need to get their grade as soon as they've done such a quiz. I covered this earlier, what's the difference between the quiz and the question bank. So the quiz is an activity in a Moodle course, and students complete that activity, and a course can have lots of different quizzes. The question bank is a repository just of questions, and each course has only one question bank. So a quiz, then, the relationship between the quiz and the question bank is that the quiz is composed of questions that are drawing from the question bank. And then from the opposite perspective, the question bank has all these questions. They're divided into categories. Categories are hierarchical. You can have you can use in the quiz, you can use categories to help you select the types of question you want to ask, whether it's by topic or by area. And you can also use tags in questions to further allow you to drill down to types of questions that you can include in the quiz. So when and where do you run quizzes? And you can either do it now, so you go into your Moodle tips and look at more details of quizzes and question banks. But I suppose more properly, you can either run formal assessments maybe in a computer lab, invigilated at a specific time and day, and for a specific duration, maybe from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock on a Thursday the 5th of May, for example. So they're kind of formal assessments. Informal assessments, they might be out of class, but maybe within a date range, like between Friday and Monday. The quiz is open for 3 days, and you have to spend 30 minutes on the quiz then. And there's one third possibility, which is that you can run it on paper. Now, lots of lecturers already run quizzes on paper and manually grade the paper, but there's also the possibility of running paper quizzes but grading on Moodle instead of doing it manually, which has a lot of attractions to it. The mechanics of creating the quiz activity are relatively straightforward. They're just a standard bit. Creating it is easy, it's configuring it is hard. So you turn course editing on, you click on the add activity or resource link at the end of a section, and you then select the quiz activity type in the pop-up dialog box that displays and click on add, and then you fill in the name of the quiz, when it's on, and a whole load of other configuration details have to be filled in as well. So once you've added the quiz, you get this HTML form page, and you type in the name, and then you start getting, that was the easy question, you then start getting the harder questions, which is you have to specify the timing for the quiz. So it might be that the quiz is open for 1 day or 1 hour or 3 days, or there might not be no time constraints on it at all. There might be a time limit of maybe 10 minutes for a formal assessment, or half an hour or an hour or whatever, while you might have open time limits on kind of informal self-assessment and so on. So you need to sort of decide, based on the type of quiz you want to run, what are the appropriate parameters to set for the timing. And then the next item would be the layout, where I would always recommend using each question in a quiz appears on its own new page, and students can navigate freely around the questions and answer them in the order that they wish. So there are two settings, the timing and the layout. There's lots more. One of the more important ones is the review options. So again, depending on the type of assessment you're trying to run, the type of quiz assessment, you need to decide when should students be allowed to see the results of the quiz, and what questions have they answered correctly and incorrectly. So depending on that, you need to decide which of the 4 columns of review options you want to check, you want to allow to happen. And say for a self-assessment quiz, you probably want to allow them to see the answers and the results immediately after the attempt, while for some kinds of formal assessment, you might only allow them to see the results after the quiz is closed for all students. So once every student has done the quiz and the quiz is now closed, then students can go back in and see how they've done, because that prevents this one student doing a quiz early on, telling all the other students what the answers are, and then they all do terrific, they all get great scores. So only after the quiz is closed to everybody do you allow students to see the attempts of their own attempts. And there are cases for a final exam, for example, when even after the quiz is closed, you don't want students to see to see any of the results and what questions were answered right and wrong and so on. So answering this question, this is effectively a question itself. You need to answer that question properly in Moodle in order to configure your quiz properly. When you've done that, there's actually lots of other settings in the quiz that we're not going to go into, but there's an awful lot to it, and there is more details on the Moodle Tips for Lecturers course, so you can go into the quizzes and question banks section and see a bit more detail about how to configure the quiz. But we'll assume for the moment that you've set up your quiz, you've clicked save and display, and now you're at the point where you are able to add questions. And by default, obviously there are no questions when you've configured the quiz first, so you click on the edit quiz button to start adding questions. What that shows you is the question list page, which is blank, and the way to add questions is, for some reason, Moodle hides or makes it difficult from a user interface perspective. It's very hard to spot where you even add questions. So it's actually the add button at the bottom right of the page is where you actually add questions, and you need to choose, typically when you've clicked on the add button, you select from question bank to add specific questions from your question bank into the quiz. And you can also choose a random question if you want to, say, add 10 questions from a pool of 50. So in a category within your question bank. But typically you might use from question bank, so we'll assume that for the moment. So you click on add from question bank, and that brings up a dialog where you can select questions, and I'll just show you that now. So I'm going to go into a random quiz, edit the quiz, and need to turn on editing to, there has been attempts already, so I can't add more questions. Go to create a new quiz. So add quiz, give it a name, choose timing. I'm going to make it available on the 3rd of June from 3 o'clock, and close it at 4 o'clock, and give people 5 minutes to answer the quiz. And I'm going to choose that every question is on a new page, and I'm going to choose free navigation, so students can go through the questions in any order and come back to them, and see all these other attempts here. So shuffle within questions, yes, I want to do that. And review options, I'm going to say after the quiz is closed, the student can see their own answers and whether they're correct. And before it's closed, immediately after their attempt, to just see their score. So they don't see whether their answer is right or wrong and what was right and wrong, but they do see what overall grade they got for the questions. So I'm going to leave it at that. And it now says, okay, no questions have been added yet. So I now click on edit quiz, and I click on the add button down here, and click on from question bank. And here's all the questions that are available to me in this course question bank. I don't want to see the subcategory questions, so I'm just going to select politics, and I want to add a small number of questions from politics. We'll just add 3 here and add these to the quiz. And I've now got a quiz with 3 multiple choice questions. You can see them here. Just dots and dashes to indicate multiple choice questions. So I now have a quiz that's consisting of 3 questions, total of 4 marks. So you can see here the total of marks is 4. And for computation reasons, it'll make life a lot easier if you change the maximum grade for the quiz to match the total number of marks. So I'm now going to save that value, and the quiz is now worth 4 marks. So I've now created my quiz, and I can go back to it. Just click on another random quiz, and as a lecturer I can preview the quiz now. It tells me I've got 5 minutes to do it. As a student, who's the Taoiseach? Multiple choice single answer type question, and the Taoiseach is Leo. Next page. Oops, who's the leader of Social Democrats? That's a hard one. I'll just flag this question and I'll come back to it. I might get some hints later on in the quiz about what's the answer to this question. So I go to the next page. I see the 3rd question. Who's the Minister for Education? Joe McGrath, Joe McHugh. Let me just say it's Joe McGrath. So I'm now going to go back. That didn't help me, so I'm going to choose who's the leader of the Social Democrats. Now I've got a hint here. This is a square box, so it looks like it's multiple answers because I can check more than one. So the chances are it's more than one. And so I'm going to choose here Roisin and Catherine are the leaders. I think I've done everything now. Finish my attempt. Answer saved for all 3 questions. Submit all and finish. And I'm done. So you can see here, as a student, I can now see the answers to the question. So I only got 3 out of 4 because I got 1 question wrong. What did I get wrong? 0 out of 1. It said Joe McGrath. So it told me I got this. remember I've set the review settings. It told me I got this question wrong, got 0 marks for it, but it doesn't actually tell me what is the right answer. So that's because I've specified that it'll show the marks in the review, but not the right answer. So now I've finished my review, and I'm back here and I'm done. So that's how to set up a quiz, select questions, and preview the quiz to see what it looks like and how the answers are displayed to students. So I've done the step then of adding questions based on selecting them from the question bank. And you can also get more complex where you select random questions from a pool. So you might have your question categories might have 20 or 30 questions, and you select a small number of random questions from it. And you can also use tags like difficulty level, Bloom's taxonomy classification level, and sort of other things to actually select certain types of questions. So you can create a randomized, filtered and structured quiz based on using sections and using random questions. When you've finished the setting up the quiz, obviously you wait for all the students to answer that quiz, and then you can look at the responses, because you have to grade the responses if it's not set up. If you have closed questions, then Moodle will grade the responses and will grade the answers itself, but if you have open questions, then you need to manually grade the questions. So when you've done when the students have done the quiz, you can go back in as lecturer and go into the quiz administration, results, responses, and you will see then all the responses that the students have made to the quiz, and you can check to see is there any kind of odd things there, and you can go and look at the responses in more detail to make sure that students have answered them correctly and that Moodle has automatically graded them correctly. And if you've designed question badly, you might find that 1 or 2 questions students are not getting marks for questions that they've got right, or possibly getting marks for questions that they haven't answered right, depending on how carefully you've been with creating the question in the first place. If you have essay type questions in your quiz, then you have to do manual grading because Moodle can't grade it for you. So you can go into the manual grading interface for quiz questions, choose manual grading, and you will see a list of any questions in the quiz that have to be graded, and you can then go in and grade those questions only. So you can see all the questions in the manual grading interface, and they're listed on the page, and you can just compare and contrast different levels of answers by different students and then grade all the answers that the students have given. A final area to look at after you've done your grading is how good or bad the questions are. So we're now no longer assessing the students, we're assessing you as a lecturer and the quality of the question that you've created. So there's lots of statistics that Moodle collates for each quiz, and what you need to do is look at those quiz questions and see how good those questions have performed. And the real question you're trying to answer here is, does the quiz discriminate between the better students and the less capable students? So if you have good quiz questions, then more of the good students should answer them correctly, and more of the less capable students will answer them incorrectly. So Moodle comes up with a discrimination index where it is assessing how good the quiz questions are. So if I go to the actual statistics for one of the test questions, I'm going to go to back to the quiz. And look at the quiz I ran this morning and look at the results, and have to go into the bottom to get the statistics. And the hardest question on the quiz, and I think I included it in the demonstration as well, was who's the leader of the Social Democrats. And so if I look down here, I find that particular question has had 7 attempts, Let's see if I can, what's it saying there? There were 7 attempts. Facility index, the discrimination index is 88%. And what that means essentially is that was a very good question at differentiating the people who really knew about politics from the people who didn't know as much about politics. So most people got Roisin Shortall as the leader correct, or more people got it correct, but fewer got Catherine Murphy correct. So the basic idea of this discrimination index is that you want to use it to find out how good your questions are at discriminating between the better and the less good students. So this is a kind of an activity that you need to run when you have run a quiz or run a series of quizzes through a semester, and you want to then, you're reviewing at the end of the semester, you're reviewing the quizzes for next year, and you want to decide, well, which quiz questions worked, which quizzes worked, which quiz questions worked, and which ones didn't work so well. Where do I need to do more work to improve the quiz questions so that they get better? They're better at discriminating between the good and the bad students. Because you don't want a question where it's so easy that the students, whether they're good or bad, they can all answer it correctly. Or alternatively, that a question that's so hard that even the good students can't answer it correctly. And if you have either of those types of questions, then you find that the discrimination index for that question, those questions, it goes down to much lower levels, where, you know, like 20-30% rather than 70-80%, which would be 70. Anything over 60-70 is good for a discrimination index. So that's the kind of statistics, and so there's quite a lot to quizzes, both before and after quizzes. You've got lots of jobs to do, so it's quite a complex strategy for education and requires a fair amount of work. Now the good thing about it though is that you get a lot of bang for your buck. When you've put in your effort to create quizzes, then you can get lots of students, particularly if you have larger class sizes. You can really assess a lot of students in large batches and get a lot of value from those quizzes once you put the work in. There's one last thing I want to mention, I just kind of mentioned briefly early on. So obviously all kind of quizzes, or nearly all quizzes in Moodle, they require that the students have access to some level of technology, and they may sometimes also require that you have access to a computer lab, and you may not always have access to a computer lab when you want it, and in fact, as technology being what it is, the PCs in the lab mightn't always work as you expect. So there's quite a lot of barriers to running quizzes on a regular basis inside in the college. So one possible answer is to run offline quizzes, so run quizzes on paper rather than online. Now the big disadvantage of paper obviously is that you normally have to you have to answer or grade those quizzes yourself. So you send out the pieces of paper with the quiz on it, collect them up at the end, and then you spend your weekend grading those quizzes to get the answers back to the students. So there's no point in doing a quiz when you don't get the answers back for 4 weeks or 3 months. You need fast feedback for quizzes. So offline quizzes on paper, they're a lot more effort for you, and then every time you run it, it's the same amount of effort. So there's a new possibility, which is to run an offline quiz where Moodle creates the quiz and generates a set of PDF files that you can hand out to students with the questions and an answer sheet, and then the students do the questions on paper, but instead of you grading them manually, you can scan them in using a printer or printer scanner type facility and upload them to Moodle, and then Moodle will grade them using OCR. So it's a more efficient way of doing things, and it's a possibility for situations where you don't have access to a computer lab, and you essentially have some kind of an answer sheet and a question sheet where there's questions on one sheet and a blank answer sheet on the other sheet, and students fill in their name and their student ID number and fill in the answers to each of the questions, and that answer sheet, then you just gather them all together, scan them back into an electronic format like PDF, and upload them to Moodle. And then Moodle in the background runs some OCR to grade those quizzes and get the answers, or grade the students with the right and the wrong answers in each case. And you end up with a reasonably efficient mechanism for doing offline quizzes that are graded online, which might be a golden kind of mean between complete offline quizzes manually graded and completely online quizzes that require quite a bit of technology. So that's it. That's grading and creating and grading quizzes. And hope if you've any more questions, you just need to email me. So we'll stop there.